three issues. One of them is that we should not confuse economic growth with economic transformation.
Right.
So I'm cautioning against the hubris at this point, because the economies have been performing very well in terms of headline numbers of growth,
Right.
Largely driven by commodities, internal factors, and so on. But the structures of the economies have not changed significantly. And one of the outcomes of that situation is that we are not creating jobs at a commensurate rate of expansion.
True. Jobless growth, we've been told.
If you wish. So the first challenge I think we have is how to go from economic growth to economic transformation.
Right.
For me, that is agenda number one, because this is how you do create jobs. You don't create jobs by looking at headline numbers generated by a narrow sector like oil or gas, because those sectors are capital intensive. They tend to damage even traditional sectors unless public policy was careful.
Right.
And therefore, if you ask me what is the biggest challenge we face,
Yeah.
it is that particular conundrum.
Right.
Because the typical narrative is there is economic growth, there are no jobs, there are inequalities. This is the reason. And so going forward, we need not only to sustain good growth numbers, but we need to shift the agenda
Okay.
into transformation.
How do we then shift that agenda to transformation? And from the main themes that are being covered here at this conference, what are you doing about it as a bank?
I think the four key issues for me are the following. For the countries where the growth numbers are coming from natural resources like oil and gas, it is extremely important that the right public choices are made in policies, first of all, to avoid the Dutch disease,
Right.
the resource curse.
Yeah.
Now, management models are known and there's no controversy. But the public policy must make a decision that this inherited wealth will be transformed into real wealth by investing in education, in agriculture, in health, especially education of the poor, to avoid the intergenerational transmission of poverty.
Yeah.
If you do so, you train your young people in skills like science and technology. Once that finite resource, which is oil,
Yeah.
is finished,
Yeah.
you'll have laid the basis for the future.
True.
Those are countries with natural resources. Those who don't have natural resources, like this region up to recently, and have done very well, by the way, it is extremely important to put in place policies that continue to reduce the cost of doing business and the risk of doing business. Because investors who come to Africa, look at Africa as one.
True.
They are hampered by some of those issues. But otherwise, even countries with their natural resources, they could benefit from what we call the neighborhood effects,
Right.
if the policies were the right ones.
Right. Now, from what you are explaining, I get the sense that there needs to be someone who takes charge of this. And I have listened to you critiquing the political will of African leaders to make sure that the issues that you're asking be addressed. Has that changed? Are we seeing African leaders beginning to think and having that mind shift that says we need to get this right?
Absolutely. I think that we have learned lessons insofar as natural resource management is concerned from the mistakes made by the first generation economies who are dependent on oil, whom you know very well. Those lessons have been learned. And I'm seeing more and more countries looking at the best practices in terms of avoiding the resource scarce natural resources. Now, there are some issues which are not easy. Going from economic growth to transformation takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. It cannot happen overnight. There are short-term trade-offs to be made. And therefore, if you're asking me whether there is political will increasingly to do so, my answer is yes. Could we go a bit faster? The answer is yes.
Are you telling?
Perhaps look at it as a partnership
Sure.
between the bank and the countries concerned. We are not here to give lessons. we're here to partner with our countries so they take advantage of what is going on now in the world to shift Africa to another gear. So telling them that's not the issue. The issue is, are we discussing these issues in partnership? You'll see this week that we're having these discussions very candid on all items.
Sure. We've got Europe in crisis. I know you cautioned against hubris, because here we are, 5.4%. We're talking about Europe in recession. But at the same time, we have to ask the question though, how do we take advantage of the opportunities that we currently have and ensure that we actually take advantage? Because while there's a large amount of money that's sloshing around the global economy, how do we direct that money into Africa?
Well, there are two issues here, Godfrey. One of them is that I think the problems in the Eurozone are deeper than we think. I think the Europeans are dealing with the symptomatic results of this crisis reasonably well, but there are deep structural issues which will take time.
Sure.
Whether you combine austerity with some growth options, still there are structural issues which will need to be addressed over the longer term. One of them is demographics and the welfare systems, the labor markets. So we should be prepared that these crises will not simply go away. They will muddle through, but may be with us for quite some time.
Sure.
So how should we be prepared? I think for me, two things are critical. One of them is that we should strengthen our shock absorbing capacity. In 2009, we had very good, robust systems to absorb the shocks from the external environment. We need to rebuild them.
Sure.
If you want, I can give some examples of how this can be done. But number two, which I think is equally important, I was at the G8 summit in Washington,
Right.
where President Obama was telling his colleagues, look, part of the solution to the growth deficit in the world is Africa and the opportunities she offers for investment. This was about agriculture, but it applies to construction, it applies to other sectors. So we need to say to the world, we are part of the solution to your problems.
Sure.
And we're putting conditions in place for you to begin growing as you have done in the past. So for me, these two things are the sweet spot. Build shock absorbing capacity and prepare for those willing to come to Africa, like the agribusiness which President Obama put together in Washington. Well, that is the way for the future.